A single gunshot cracks through the silent von Klaus mansion. General Erich von Klaus, iron hero of the Reich, sits dead at his desk, pistol in hand, a signed confession beside him. "I betrayed my country for foreign gold. Suicide," the police declare. Case closed, yet the door was locked from the inside. The ink is still wet, and the faint scent of bitter almonds lingers in the air. At the stroke of midnight, a small Belgian with the most magnificent mustache in Europe steps from the fog. Hercule Poirot has been summoned, and he smells murder. Chapter 1. The Shadowed Study. The fog that night was not merely weather, it was a living thing. It coiled like cigarette smoke around the wrought iron lamps of the Tiergarten, slipped its cold fingers beneath the collars of hurrying pedestrians, and pressed its pale face against the high windows of the von Klaus mansion on Rauchstrasse. Berlin, November 1935, had dressed itself in mourning colors even before the city knew it had cause. Inside the great house, the clocks had just chimed 9 when the single gunshot cracked through the corridors like a whip. It was not a loud house by habit. The General Erich von Klaus had always preferred silence to music, precision to noise. Servants moved on felt-slippered feet. Even the grandfather clock in the entrance hall had been adjusted to strike a muted, almost apologetic note. So the gunshot was obscene in its violence, a brutal intrusion into the ordered hush. It rolled down the marble staircase, rattled the crystal pendants of the chandeliers, and died at last in the velvet drapes of the drawing room where Frau Helena von Klaus sat alone with her embroidery. She did not scream. She rose very straight, the needle still pinched between her bloodless fingers, and walked toward the sound as though pulled by an invisible wire. Behind her, the embroidery silks, crimson gold and imperial purple, unraveled across the Aubusson carpet like spilled entrails. Upstairs, in the corridor outside the general's study, the butler Richter was already fumbling with the doorknob. His hands, usually so steady when pouring the general's evening cognac, shook as though with fever. The door was locked from the inside. "Mein General," he called, voice cracking. "Excellenz?" No answer came but the soft, deliberate ticking of the ormolu clock on the mantel within. Richter stepped back and drove his shoulder against the oak. Once, twice. On the third impact, the lock splintered and the door swung inward, exhaling a breath of cordite and something sweeter. Almond, perhaps, or the ghost of marzipan. The study was lit only by a single green-shaded desk lamp and the sullen glow of the dying fire. General Erich von Klaus sat in his high-backed chair exactly as he had sat for the last 20 years. Spine rigid, shoulders squared, the iron cross at his throat catching what little light there was. Only now his head had fallen forward, chin resting on the metals as though in exhausted salute. A neat, dark hole pierced the exact center of his forehead. A Wehrmacht Luger lay on the blotter in front of him, one wisp of smoke still curling from the barrel like a departing soul. On the blotter beside the pistol lay a single sheet of heavy cream paper. The general's personal stationery with its embossed crest, a stylized eagle clutching a laurel wreath. The handwriting was his, unmistakable even at a glance, the severe downward stroke of the T, the flourish on the capital E. Richter, who had served the household for 33 years, knew that hand the way a priest knows scripture. He read the words he would never forget. "To whomever finds me, I, Erich Ludwig Adolf von Klaus, General der Infanterie, do hereby confess that for the past 4 years I have betrayed the fatherland. I have sold military secrets to agents of a foreign power in exchange for gold deposited in numbered accounts in Zurich. The shame is unbearable. There is no atonement save this. Forgive me if you can. Erich von Klaus, Berlin, 12th of November, 1935. Richter's knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of a leather armchair. The confession was dated yesterday. The general had written it 24 hours before putting the pistol to his own head. Footsteps sounded behind him, quick, light, the tap of a woman's heels. Helena von Klaus appeared in the doorway, a black silk shawl slipping from her shoulders. For a moment she looked very young, almost girlish, the lamplight catching in the pale gold of her hair. Then she saw her husband, and the years rushed back into her face all at once. "Erich," she whispered, as though the dead man might yet answer. She walked forward slowly past Richter, past the splintered door, until she stood beside the desk. One gloved hand reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the general's cheek. It was still warm. Helena von Klaus did not cry. She simply closed her husband's staring eyes with 2 fingers, the gesture of a woman who had closed those same eyes in sleep 1,000 times. Then she picked up the confession, read it once without expression, and let the paper fall back onto the blotter as though it burned her. "Call the police," she said, voice perfectly steady. "And then send word to Captain Muller. He will know what to do." Richter stumbled away to obey. Helena remained alone with her dead husband for perhaps 30 seconds. In that brief silence, she noticed 2 things. First, the French windows that opened onto the terrace stood ajar, a finger's breadth, letting in a ribbon of cold fog. Second, on the carpet near the general's polished boots lay a single pearl earring, small, perfectly round, and very valuable. It had not been there when she passed the study an hour earlier on her way downstairs. She bent, picked it up, and closed it in her fist just as the first police siren began to wail in the distance. By midnight, the house was no longer a home, but a stage. Electric bulbs glared. Black uniformed officers stamped snow from their boots in the entrance hall. A photographer's magnesium flashes lit the study like lightning. The confession had been photographed, bagged, and whisked away to headquarters on Alexanderplatz. The preliminary verdict, delivered by Criminal Commissar Becker with the weary certainty of a man who had seen too many aristocratic suicides, was swift. Self-inflicted wound, motive evident, case closed by morning. Yet one detail nagged at Becker, a flea in the collar of certainty. The general had been right-handed, yet the entrance wound was on the right side of the forehead. Possible, certainly, but awkward. And the pistol had fallen in such a way that the muzzle pointed toward the French windows, not toward the hand that supposedly fired it. Becker shrugged. Generals, he thought, were not like ordinary men. Perhaps von Klaus had wished to die looking out at his garden one last time. At 12:47 a.m., a taxicab drew up before the mansion. From it stepped a small man in a fur-collared overcoat, carrying a Malacca cane with an ivory handle. His patent leather shoes were barely damp despite the wet streets, and his mustache, magnificent, perfectly waxed, curled upward like the antennae of some alert, fastidious insect. Hercule Poirot paused on the threshold, surveying the scene with bright green eyes that missed nothing. The muddy footprints on the marble, the shivering maid clutching a rosary in the shadows, the faint scent of bitter almonds that lingered beneath the gun smoke. Captain Karl Müller, the general's adjutant, hurried forward, his face pale beneath the peaked cap. "Monsieur Poirot, I am relieved beyond words that you came so quickly. The telegram—" Poirot raised one gloved hand. "It reached me at the Adlon not 1 hour ago, mon capitaine. My old friend General von Klaus begs the favor of my presence on a matter most urgent. And now, voila, he is dead. One might almost call it inconsiderate, non?" Miller flushed. "The general took his own life, monsieur. The confession—" Poirot's eyes flicked to the staircase. "We shall see. First, I pay my respects." He mounted the stairs with the neat, brisk step of a man who has never wasted motion in his life. At the study door, he paused again, inhaling deeply. "Bitter almonds," he murmured. "Prussic acid, perhaps, and yet the good cordite, a cocktail most unpleasant. Commissar Becker, overhearing, bristled. With respect, Herr Poirot, this is a German matter. The Belgian police are not concerned, I assure you, Poirot finished smoothly. I am here as a private visitor, at the written request of the deceased. You will permit? Becker hesitated, then stood aside. Poirot entered the study alone. He stood for a long moment in the center of the room, quite still, only his eyes moving, left, right, up, down, like the needle of a compass seeking north. Then he began his examination with the meticulous grace of a man arranging flowers. He studied the position of the body, the angle of the head. He sniffed delicately at the pistol barrel. He noted the faint scuff marks on the polished floor near the French windows, the single pearl earring now missing from Helena's clenched fist, though he could not know that yet, and the almost invisible scratch on the inside of the desk drawer, where something heavy had recently been removed. At length he straightened, twirling the end of his mustache. Non, non, et encore non, he said softly to the dead man. This is not suicide, mon général. This is murder most ingenious. And the confession you supposedly wrote, pah! It smells, if you will pardon the expression, of the fish market. He turned to the doorway where Muller, Helena, and Becker watched in uneasy silence. Madam, Poirot addressed the widow with a small bow, accept my profound condolences, and now, if you please, we begin. Because somewhere in this house, among those who loved you or hated you or merely wished you gone, walks a murderer who believes himself, or herself, very clever indeed. Outside, the fog thickened. Somewhere in the city a clock began to strike one, and Hercule Poirot, his little gray cells already humming like a hive of furious bees, prepared to disturb the silence of the von Klaus mansion far more thoroughly than any gunshot ever could. Chapter 2. The Widow's Veil. The drawing room of the von Klaus mansion was a shrine to old Prussian glory. Dark oil portraits of generals in spiked helmets glared down from paneled walls. A bearskin rug sprawled before the marble fireplace like a slain enemy. Yet on this bleak November morning the fire burned low, as though even the flames mourned their master. Hercule Poirot stood at the tall windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching the last wisps of fog retreat across the frost-bitten lawn. His reflection in the glass was neat, compact, immaculate, a small dark figure amid the vast gloom. Behind him, Frau Helena von Klaus sat very straight on a brocade sofa, dressed in mourning black that made her skin appear almost translucent. A black lace veil covered her golden hair but could not hide the delicate tremor of her lower lip. She had not slept. Faint violet shadows lay beneath her eyes like bruises. In her gloved hands she turned the single pearl earring she had found the night before, rolling it round and round as though it were a rosary bead. Poirot turned from the window with the soft click of his heels. Madame, he began gently, you will forgive the intrusion of questions at such a time. But the little gray cells, they do not observe the conventions of grief. They demand facts. Helena lifted her veil. Her eyes were the pale blue of a winter sky. Ask what you must, Monsieur Poirot. I want the truth, whatever it may be. Bien. Then we commence with the simplest of matters. Last evening at what hour did you last see your husband alive? At 7:30, she replied without hesitation. We dined early. Eric complained of a headache and retired to his study to work. He asked not to be disturbed. Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to the grand piano where a silver-framed photograph showed the general in full-dress uniform, arm protectively around a much younger Helena. And after dinner? I played bridge here with 3 friends, Frau von Richter, Baroness von Linge, and Countess von Arnim. We began at 8 and continued until the shot was heard at 9. Richter will confirm it. The ladies left only when the police arrived. Impeccable, Poirot murmured. An alibi of the most solid, and yet, madam, alibis are like porcelain. Beautiful, but easily cracked if one knows where to tap. He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Tell me of the will. Helena's fingers tightened on the pearl. My husband altered his will 6 months ago. Everything, the estate, the investments, the house, passes to me. Heinrich, our son, receives only a small allowance until he reaches 35. Eric believed discipline would cure his excesses. Excesses. Gambling, women, fast motor cars. Heinrich is 28 and still behaves like a student with a rich father. A flicker of bitterness crossed her face, quickly suppressed. Eric was harsh, perhaps, but he loved the boy in his own way. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And Captain Mueller, the devoted aide who telegraphed me so urgently, where does he fit into this charming family portrait? As if summoned by the name, the door opened and Captain Karl Mueller entered with military precision. He was tall, lean in his early 30s, with close-cropped fair hair and the kind of face that looked carved rather than born. Sharp cheekbones, a mouth that rarely smiled. His uniform was immaculate, but the skin beneath his eyes was gray with fatigue. Madam, he said, clicking his heels and bowing to Helena. Then to Poirot. I came as soon as the morning reports were finished. The general's death will be announced as suicide in the official bulletins. The confession makes it unavoidable. Helena rose. Captain Monsieur Poirot believes it was murder. Muller's composure faltered for the briefest instant. Murder? With the door locked from within and his own pistol? Precisely, Poirot interrupted, stepping forward. A locked room is the favorite playground of the clever assassin. Tell me, Capitaine, when did you last see the general alive? Yesterday at 4 o'clock. We reviewed troop dispositions in his study. He was agitated more than usual. He spoke of betrayal, of enemies within the high command. I urged him to rest. He dismissed me. Poirot circled the captain slowly like a terrier inspecting a promising bone. And this confession? Did he mention writing it? No, but he kept a locked drawer for private papers. The key was on his chain. Muller hesitated. There is something else. Yesterday morning, a cufflink was missing from the study. Gold engraved with my initials, KM. A birthday gift from the general 2 years ago. I thought I had mislaid it. Helena's gaze sharpened. You were in the study yesterday morning? Only to deliver dispatches, Muller said quickly. I noticed it on the carpet when I left. Poirot's mustache twitched with satisfaction. A clue, planted or lost? He filed it away. At that moment, the maid Anna Schmidt appeared in the doorway, pale and trembling, carrying a silver tray with coffee. She was perhaps 22, small and dark, with anxious brown eyes. As she set the tray down, her sleeve rode up, revealing a faint bruise on her wrist. Anna, Helena said kindly, Monsieur Poirot will wish to speak with you later. For now, that will be all. The girl bobbed a curtsy and fled. Poirot sipped his coffee, excellent naturally, and resumed his gentle interrogation. Madame, your husband feared exposure, you said last night. Exposure of what? Helena's voice dropped to a whisper. 3 weeks ago, he began receiving anonymous letters. They accused him of treason, selling secrets to the British. He burned them, but the fear ate at him. He hardly slept. Last week, he told me he had arranged to meet someone who claimed to have proof of his innocence. The meeting was to take place last night after dinner. He would not say who. Muller's jaw tightened. He told me nothing of this meeting. Perhaps, Poirot said softly. He no longer trusted even his closest aide. The captain flushed dark red. Before he could reply, Richter entered bearing a small silver salver. On it lay a telegram. For Monsieur Poirot, the butler intoned. Poirot slit the envelope with a manicured nail. The message was brief, typed in capital letters. Stop searching. The general's death was justice. Next time the bullet will not miss. No signature. The room seemed to grow colder. Helena pressed a hand to her throat. Muller reached instinctively for his holster. Poirot folded the telegram with deliberate calm and slipped it into his waistcoat pocket. It appears, mes amis, that our murderer grows nervous. Good. A nervous murderer makes mistakes. He moved to the door, pausing on the threshold. One last thing, madam. The pearl earring you hold so tightly, may I see it? Helena's fingers flew open as though the pearl had burned her. It rolled across the carpet and came to rest at Poirot's feet. He picked it up, examined it beneath the chandelier's light, and returned it with a small bow. Exquisite, and I think part of a pair you wore to the opera 3 nights ago. Tell me, did you visit the study after dinner? No, she said too quickly. Poirot merely smiled. Of course not. My mistake. He left them. Then the little Belgian detective with the egg-shaped head and the eyes of a cat, gliding toward the staircase. Behind him the fire settled in the grate with a soft hiss, and the portrait of General von Klaus seemed to watch with new wariness. As Poirot reached the first landing, a floorboard creaked overhead. He looked up. For an instant he glimpsed a shadow retreating along the upper corridor. Tall, uniformed, moving with the silent haste of a soldier on enemy ground. Poirot's smile widened. Eh bien, he murmured to himself. The game begins. And somewhere in the house a clock struck 10, each chime falling into the uneasy silence like a pebble into deep water, sending ripples that would not cease until the truth, or another corpse, rose to the surface. Chapter 3. The Sun's Shadow. The library of the von Klaus mansion smelled of old leather, cigar smoke, and defeat. Heavy velvet curtains were still drawn against the pale November daylight. So the room lived in a perpetual twilight broken only by a single lamp on the long table. Books rose in severe ranks to the painted ceiling. Clausewitz, Moltke, Schlieffen. Volumes bound in blood-red morocco that had never been handled by generations of Prussian officers who believed war was an exact science and honor an exacting master. Heinrich von Klaus sprawled in one of the tall wing chairs as though he had been poured there. A silk dressing gown of peacock blue hung open over his evening clothes from the night before. His eyes were red-rimmed, his handsome face slack with drink and sleeplessness. An empty cognac glass tilted in his lax fingers. A second glass, half full, stood on the floor beside a silver cigarette case whose lid bore the same crest as the confession paper. The laurel-wreathed eagle. He did not rise when Poirot entered. He merely lifted his gaze with the slow insolence of a young man who has learned that charm and money can excuse almost anything. So, Heinrich drawled in cultivated Berlin German, the famous Hercule Poirot. My father kept your photograph in a file marked useful foreigners. I always wondered why. Poirot inclined his head, unoffended. Your father, monsieur, valued precision in all things, even in his prejudices. May I sit? Heinrich waved a languid hand. Poirot took the opposite chair, placed his cane across his knees, and regarded the young man with bright, unblinking eyes. You are aware, I am sure, that your father disinherited you. Heinrich's mouth twisted. He did not disinherit me. He postponed me. There is a difference. He reached for the cognac, found it empty, and swore softly. Until I am 35, I am to receive a pittance, provided I behave like a good little cadet. After that, everything. Naturally, he expected to live forever. And now he will not, Poirot observed mildly. Heinrich gave a short, ugly laugh. Now I wait 7 more years while my charming stepmother spends the interest. Unless, of course, she remarries. The will is quite clear on that point. He rose abruptly, crossed to the window, and jerked the curtain aside. Winter sunlight, thin and cold, fell across his face and showed the faint tremor in his jaw. I hated him, he said to the glass. He knew it. He enjoyed it. Every mark I owed at the tables, every actress I kept, every racing car I smashed, he paid and he punished. Last month he told me that if I brought one more scandal to the family name, he would cut me off entirely. I think he was looking forward to it. Poirot watched the young man's reflection. And yet you were here last night. I arrived at 10:30, Heinrich said, turning. After the bridge party had begun, I went straight to the billiard room, drank most of a bottle of Armagnac, and passed out on the sofa. Richter found me at dawn. You may ask him. I already have, Poirot replied. He confirms it, yet a footman swears he saw you on the upper landing at 9:15, exactly the time of the shot. Heinrich paled beneath his stubble. The footman is mistaken, or lying for a few marks. Perhaps. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, monsieur, did you visit your father's study yesterday? Briefly. Around 6, I wanted money. He refused. We quarreled. I left. Poirot's gaze drifted to Heinrich's cuffs. The left sleeve bore a small, dark stain. Dried blood, perhaps, or red wine. Heinrich noticed the look and tugged the cuff down with a gesture that was almost guilty. At that moment, the door opened without ceremony, and Anna Schmidt entered, carrying a tray of fresh coffee and a plate of biscuits she clearly did not expect anyone to eat. She kept her eyes lowered, but Poirot saw her glance flicker toward Heinrich with something between fear and compassion. Thank you, Anna, Heinrich said, his voice suddenly gentle. Leave it there. She obeyed, but as she turned to go, Poirot spoke. One moment, mademoiselle. You have served this household how long? 7 years, mein Herr. Her voice was scarcely above a whisper. And the general? He was kind to you. Anna's cheeks flamed. He was just. Poirot noted the hesitation. Last night, before the shot, did you hear raised voices from the study? She shook her head too quickly. No, sir. Only the general working alone. Heinrich laughed again harshly. Don't torment the girl, monsieur. She is terrified of her own shadow. Anna fled. The door closed softly behind her. Poirot rose. One final question, Herr von Klaus. Your father's safe. It was forced after his death. Certain papers are missing. You would not know anything about that? Heinrich met his eyes steadily for the first time. If I had robbed my father's safe, Monsieur Poirot, I would not still be here drinking his cognac. I would be in Monte Carlo spending his money. Poirot inclined his head, conceding the point, and moved toward the door. On the threshold, he paused. Your cuff, monsieur. The stain. It is blood. Heinrich glanced down, shrugged. I cut myself shaving, a hazard of trembling hands. Naturellement? Poirot left the library deep in thought. In the corridor, he almost collided with Captain Miller, who was hurrying past with a sheaf of papers and an expression of controlled fury. Forgive me, Miller said stiffly. The morning has been complicated. Poirot detained him with a gloved hand. Capitaine, a word. The young Herr von Klaus, is he in debt? Miller's mouth thinned. To half the banks in Berlin and most of the casinos on the Riviera. The general refused to pay any more. Heinrich threatened to sell family papers, anything for cash. There was a fearful row last week. Thank you. Miller hesitated. Monsieur Poirot, this telegram you received, do you believe the killer is still in the house? Poirot's eyes glittered. I believe, mon capitaine, that the killer has never left it. He continued down the corridor. Behind him, from the library, came the crash of breaking glass. Poirot did not turn back. He had expected something of the sort. In the entrance hall, he found Richter polishing the banister with unnecessary vigor. "The young master has a temper," Poirot remarked. Richter's old face was impassive. "Always has had, sir. But last night after the shot, he was weeping in the billiard room like a child. Said over and over, he can't be dead. He can't be." Poirot absorbed this. And the safe, Richter. Who else knew the combination? "Only the general, sir. And perhaps—" The butler lowered his voice. "Perhaps the captain. He was often alone with the general of an evening." Poirot nodded thoughtfully and stepped out onto the terrace. The cold air struck his face like a slap. He walked the length of the house until he stood beneath the study's French windows. There, half hidden in the frost-stiff ivy, he found what he had hoped for. A single clear footprint in the soft earth of the flower bed. A man's shoe, narrow, elegant, with a distinctive wear on the outer heel. The print pointed toward the house, not away. Poirot crouched, measuring it with his eyes. Size 42, perhaps 43. Captain Muller wore 44. Heinrich, he recalled, took 42. He straightened, brushing soil from his gloves, and looked up at the upper windows. For an instant he thought he saw a curtain twitch on the second floor, but when he stared harder, there was only blank glass reflecting the wintry sky. Somewhere inside, a woman began to sob quietly, hopelessly. Poirot twirled his mustache and murmured to the empty garden, "Patience, Hercule. The little gray cells are stirring. Soon they will dance." And high above him, unseen, Heinrich von Klaus stood at his bedroom window, staring down at the small, neat figure in the black overcoat. His right hand was clenched so tightly that blood from the shaving cut dripped between his fingers and spotted the carpet like tiny accusations. The house held its breath, waiting for the next lie to be spoken. Chapter 4. Whispers of Treason. The afternoon light in Berlin was the color of tarnished brass. It filtered through the tall windows of the Adlon Hotel's winter garden, where potted palms cast sharp shadows across white tablecloths, and the low murmur of diplomats, journalists, and nervous businessmen rose and fell like surf. Hercule Poirot sat alone at a corner table, a small black coffee untouched before him, watched Colonel Fritz Brandt cross the room with the heavy tread of a man who expects the floor to salute. Brandt was built like a siege gun, broad chest, thick neck, a dueling scar that pulled the left corner of his mouth into a permanent contempt. His uniform was that of the old-school high collar, silver death's head on the collar patch, iron cross first class with oak leaves. He removed his peaked cap, tucked it under one arm, and sat without waiting for an invitation. "So the great Poirot wishes to interrogate me." His voice was a gravel rumble. "Make it quick. I have a staff meeting at 4. Poirot smiled pleasantly. "Colonel, I interrogate no one. I merely arrange the facts in their proper order like a conscientious housekeeper. Tell me, how long have you hated General von Klaus?" Brandt's scar twitched. "Hate is a strong word. And yet accurate, I think. 20 years ago he received the Pour le Mérite for a victory you believe was yours. Since then he has blocked every promotion above your present rank. A man of your vigor must find that intolerable." Brandt's fist tightened on the table. Von Klaus was a cautious old woman who fought the last war with maps from the one before. The army needs fire, not caution. "Fire," Poirot repeated softly. "Fire can be useful, but it also consumes the hand that carries it too close." He produced a thin cigar case, selected a tiny cigarette, and lit it with a gold lighter that flared once, sharply. "Tell me about the cigars." Brandt blinked. "Cigars?" "Last night a box of Havana cigars was found in the general's study. One had been tampered with, hollowed and refilled with a paste of potassium cyanide crystals. The rest were untouched. The box came from your supplier in Hamburg. You sent them to the general last Christmas, did you not? Brandt's eyes narrowed. I sent him a box, yes. A courtesy between old comrades. If someone poisoned them later. They had access to his study, Poirot finished. And to your taste in tobacconists. Curious, n'est-ce pas? Brandt leaned forward, voice dropping to a growl. Listen, little man. If I had wanted Erich von Klaus dead, I would have challenged him properly, blade or pistol at 20 paces, not with tricks. Poirot inclined his head. Honor. One admires the sentiment. Yet honor rarely leaves poisoned cigars lying about for the servants to discover. He signaled the waiter, paid the untouched coffee, and rose. Thank you, Colonel. You have been most instructive. Brandt caught his sleeve as he turned away. Be careful, Poirot. There are men in this city who would put a bullet in you for asking the wrong question. Poirot looked down at the thick fingers on his sleeve, then into Brandt's eyes. I am always careful, Colonel. It is the murderers who should be careful now. Outside, the wind had teeth. Poirot turned up his collar and walked the short distance to the British Embassy on Wilhelmstrasse. He did not go to the front door. Instead, he slipped through the tradesman's entrance and was admitted to a small office smelling of coal smoke and secrecy. Major Alistair Langley of the Intelligence Service, an old acquaintance, closed the door and poured 2 whiskeys without asking. You're stirring a very dirty pond, Hercule. We've been watching von Klaus for months. Poirot accepted the glass but did not drink. So the anonymous letters were yours? Langley gave a thin smile. Let us say we helped the general's conscience along. He was selling mobilization timetables to the French, not many, but enough to be hanged 3 times over. We preferred him alive and frightened. Suicide with a confession suited us very well. And yet, Poirot murmured, he did not kill himself. No, Langley admitted. Which is why I'm talking to you. Someone else got to him first, and they got the last set of documents too. They vanished from his safe between 8:30 and 9:15 last night. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The hour of the bridge party, and the hour of the shot. How very convenient for the murderer. He left the embassy by a different door and took a taxi back to Reichstrasse. The von Klaus mansion looked in the dying light like a great black ship foundering in the fog. Inside, Richter met him with the air of a man who had been waiting for bad news. The police have finished, sir. They've taken the pistol and the confession. Commissar Becker says the case is closed. Poirot removed his galoshes. Then Commissar Becker is a fool. Where is Captain Muller? In the study, sir, with Frau von Klaus. Poirot ascended the stairs slowly, letting his cane tap a thoughtful rhythm. At the study door he paused. Voices drifted out, low and urgent. You must destroy the letter, Karl. If they find it... My darling, hush. No one suspects. Poirot entered without knocking. Helena was at the desk, a sheet of paper in her trembling hand. Muller stood close, his palm against her cheek. Both sprang apart as if burned. Poirot closed the door softly. Pardon the interruption. I merely wished to return this. He placed on the blotter the single pearl earring Helena had dropped in the drawing room the previous night. She stared at it as though it were a scorpion. Muller recovered first. Monsieur Poirot, this is hardly... Poirot raised a hand. A moment, Capitaine. Tell me, did the general ever mention to you a woman named Ilse von Hagen? Muller went very still. Helena's breath caught. Langley had given him the name an hour ago. A cabaret singer, Muller's mistress, who had vanished 2 weeks earlier after threatening to expose his gambling debts. I don't know the name, Muller said flatly. No? Poirot produced from his pocket a small photograph he had found tucked in the back of the general's desk drawer. It showed a dark-haired woman in sequins inscribed in a man's hand. To Karl, who promises everything and gives nothing. I. The handwriting matched the anonymous letters the general had burned. Helena made a small, wounded sound. Poirot replaced the photo. So many motives in one small house. Love, money, ambition, fear. And somewhere among them, murder. He turned to leave, then paused at the French windows. The footprint he had seen earlier in the flower bed had been carefully brushed away. He smiled to himself. Bonsoir, mes amis. Sleep well. The net tightens. As his footsteps receded, Helena whispered, Karl, what if he finds... Muller's answer was lost as the great clock in the hall began to strike 5, each chime a hammer blow in the gathering dark, and somewhere in the house a telephone rang once, sharply, and was abruptly cut off. Chapter 5. The Forged Hand. The drawing room had become a tribunal. 6 high-backed chairs had been arranged in a half-circle facing the fireplace. A cold November dusk pressed against the tall windows. The chandelier had not yet been lit, so the only light came from the flames and from the green-shaded desk lamp Poirot had ordered carried down from the study. On its leather top lay the instruments of judgment, the confession letter under a glass weight, the Luger wrapped in silk, a magnifying lens, a small chemist's vial of gray powder, and a single gold cufflink engraved KM. The suspects sat like statues. Helena, all in black, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the carpet. Captain Muller, rigid in his chair, cheek twitching every few seconds. Heinrich, unshaven, still in the peacock dressing gown, a fresh cut on his knuckle where he had punched the library mirror. Anna Schmidt, the maid, twisting her apron into a rope, tears already drying on her cheeks. Colonel Brandt had been summoned from Potsdam. He stood behind the others, arms folded, scar livid in the firelight. Poirot stood before them, small, immaculate, terrible in his calm. Mesdames, messieurs, he began, voice soft yet carrying to every corner, we have arrived at the moment of truth. The police of Berlin are content with suicide. Hercule Poirot is not. Therefore, we shall examine the facts together, and the facts, they never lie. He lifted the confession letter with gloved fingers. First, the handwriting. It is an excellent forgery. The slope, the pressure, even the little flourish on the capital E, all perfect. And yet, he held it to the lamp. The ink is iron gall, the same the general used for 20 years. But this ink is fresh, too fresh. A suicide writes his confession hours, perhaps days in advance. This was written yesterday afternoon, no earlier. The paper still smells faintly of the blotter. He laid the sheet down and picked up the Luger. Second, the pistol. Right-handed man, wound in the right temple, yet the muzzle residue is heaviest on the left side of the barrel. Curious, and the trigger guard bears a microscopic smear of cold cream, the same Helena uses on her hands each night. Yet Helena was playing bridge. Helena's breath hissed between her teeth. Third, Poirot continued, the safe. It was opened with the general's own key, which never left the chain around his neck. The chain was broken, not cut. Someone tore it free in haste. He turned to Anna. The girl flinched. Mademoiselle, you told me you heard nothing. Yet your room is directly above the study. A pistol shot is loud. You heard it and you ran downstairs. You saw someone leaving by the French windows. You have been afraid ever since. Anna's mouth trembled. I thought it was a servant. No servant wears French perfume, Poirot said gently. The scent lingers on the curtains still. L'heure bleue, expensive, worn by only one person in this house. All eyes turned to Helena. She did not move. Poirot lifted the cufflink. This was found beneath the desk. Captain Muller lost one, he says, yesterday morning. Yet the twin is in his dressing room drawer, but this one has a speck of blood on the pin. type O. The general was type A. Whose blood, then? Heinrich laughed, a cracked sound. Mine. I told you, shaving. Poirot shook his head. You cut your left hand this morning punching the mirror. The blood on the cufflink is days old. He set the cufflink down and took up the chemist's vial. Fourth, and most damning, the general's lips and tongue show traces of hydrocyanic acid, prussic acid, odor of bitter almonds. Enough to stun, not enough to kill outright. The bullet finished the work. The poison was in his evening brandy. The decanter on the tray in the study still carries the scent. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. Someone entered the study after dinner, poured brandy, added poison, waited until the general was unconscious, placed the pistol to his temple, fired, arranged the confession, and left by the French windows. The door was then locked from the inside using a simple trick. A thread looped round the key, pulled through the gap beneath the door, then withdrawn. A trick known to every stage magician and to every officer who studied espionage at Potsdam in 1929. Muller half rose. This is fantasy. Poirot's voice cut like a whip. Sit down, Capitaine. Muller sat. Poirot turned to Helena. Madame, you were seen by the footman on the upper landing at 9:09. You told us you were in the drawing room. Helena's voice was a thread. I went up to fetch my handkerchief. I heard nothing. Poirot's eyes softened for a moment. You heard everything, madame, and you have protected the murderer ever since. He pivoted to Heinrich. You, monsieur, needed money desperately. You knew the combination to the safe. Your father taught it to you when you were 12. You came last night hoping to steal papers you could sell. You found your father already dead. You panicked, took what you could, and fled. Heinrich buried his face in his hands. Poirot moved to Anna. And you, petite, you are the general's daughter. He acknowledged you in secret, promised you a dowry. Someone threatened to expose you both. You chose silence to save your mother's name. Anna began to sob. Colonel Brandt growled, Get to the point, man. Poirot smiled without humor. Patience, Colonel. The point arrives now. He lifted the confession letter again, turned it over. On the reverse, invisible to the naked eye until dusted with the gray powder, a faint watermark appeared, a tiny letters almost microscopic, K.M. Captain Karl Müller, Poirot said quietly. You wrote this forgery yesterday afternoon in your office at the Bendler block, using the general's own pen which you borrowed on Tuesday. You poisoned the brandy when you brought him the evening dispatches at 8:30. You returned at 9, found him helpless, shot him, staged the suicide, and left by the terrace. The cufflink was torn from your sleeve in the struggle when the general, not quite unconscious, tried to fight you. You thought the darkness hid it. Muller's face had gone the color of wet ash. Prove it, he rasped. Poirot produced a final object, a torn scrap of gray military notepaper found caught in the terrace door. On it, in Muller's unmistakable hand, final payment received. Destroy this. Muller stared at it as though it were a death warrant. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the room. You sold the mobilization plans to the British, Capitaine. The general discovered it. He was preparing to denounce you. You killed him to save yourself and forged the confession to make it appear he took his own life in shame. For a long moment no one moved. Then Muller lunged, not for Poirot but for the pistol on the desk. Brandt was faster. His big hand closed round Muller's wrist like a vice. The captain screamed once, a high animal sound as the bones cracked. Helena rose slowly. The black veil had slipped from her hair. In the firelight she looked suddenly old. You fool, she said to Muller almost tenderly. He was going to forgive you. He told me last week. He was going to give you one last chance. Muller sagged in Brandt's grip, all arrogance gone. Poirot turned away. The triumph he usually felt was absent. Only weariness remained. Richter, he called softly. The butler appeared as though conjured. Telephone Commissar Becker. Tell him Hercule Poirot has a prisoner for him. As Richter hurried out, Poirot looked once more at the little group. The weeping girl, the broken son, the shattered widow, the scarred colonel holding the traitor like a rag doll. Thus ends the confession of General von Klaus, he said quietly. It was never his. It was always yours, Capitaine. And now the fatherland will have its own confession from you. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and silent, covering the footprints in the garden as though they had never been. But inside the drawing room, the air still reeked of bitter almonds and betrayal, and the fire burned low, throwing long shadows that danced like guilty consciences across the walls. Chapter 6. Shadows in the alley. The snow had stopped, but the cold had sharpened its knife. Berlin at 2 in the morning was a city of blacked out and whispering. Street lamps burned low, blue paper over the bulbs so that only a sickly glow reached the pavements. Hercule Poirot walked alone down a narrow alley behind the von Klaus mansion, coat collar turned up, malacca cane tapping a soft, deliberate rhythm on the frozen cobbles. He had left the house in deliberate silence, refusing Richter's offer of a car, refusing even the police escort Becker had pressed upon him. I have need of solitude, he had said, and of a murderer who believes himself safe. Captain Muller was at that moment locked in a cell at Alexanderplatz, screaming denials between bouts of vomiting. The after effect of the mild sedative Becker had given him to prevent suicide. The newspapers would carry the story tomorrow. Traitorous aide confesses to general's murder. The Reich would be satisfied. The British embassy would be satisfied. The von Klaus family would be left in dignified ruin. And yet Poirot walked through the freezing dark with the uneasy certainty that the play was not finished. He had seen it in Helena's eyes when Muller was dragged away. A flicker of something that was not quite relief, not quite grief. He had seen it in Colonel Brandt's scarred face, a satisfaction too swift, too complete. And he had seen it in Anna Schmidt's terrified glance toward the upper landing as the police car pulled away. There were still shadows moving. The alley ended at a high brick wall overhung by the bare branches of a chestnut tree. Poirot stopped beneath a rusted iron ladder that led to the rear courtyard of the mansion. He did not climb. Instead, he waited motionless until the city's distant noises, a tram bell, a drunk singing the horsed Wessel-Lied, the low growl of a staff car, faded into the hush of snow. Then he heard it, the soft scrape of a window opening 2 floors above. A figure appeared on the sill of the general's study, black against the faint glow inside, then dropped lightly to the terrace roof, slid down a drain pipe with practiced ease, and landed cat-footed in the courtyard. A man in a dark overcoat and soft hat. He moved quickly toward the ladder. Poirot stepped from the shadows. "Bonsoir, Colonel Brandt." The big man froze. For a moment the only sound was their breathing, white plumes in the icy air. Brandt's right hand slid inside his coat. "Poirot, you should be in your warm hotel bed. And you should be in Potsdam, Colonel, mourning an old comrade." Poirot's cane lifted a fraction. The ivory handle glinted. "But instead you returned to the scene of the crime. Why?" Brandt's scar twisted. "I forgot my gloves." "No, you came for the second set of documents, the ones Muller did not know about, the ones the general kept in the false bottom of the cigar humidor." Brandt's eyes narrowed. "You are guessing." "I am knowing. Poirot took one precise step forward. Miller poisoned the brandy and fired the shot, yes. But he did not write the confession. The watermark KM was clever misdirection, but the paper came from your private stationery, Colonel. I found the torn corner in your wastebasket this afternoon, when you so kindly invited me to your office to clear up misunderstandings. Brandt's hand emerged holding a Walther PPK. You are a nuisance, little Belgian. And you are an impatient man. You used Muller the way a hunter uses a beater, drive the game toward the gun. You fed him just enough secrets to sell, let the British frighten the general, then arranged for Muller to silence him forever. The perfect scapegoat, ambitious, indebted, already compromised. You even planted the cufflink, but you made one mistake. Brandt's thumb eased the safety catch. Enlighten me. You underestimated the vanity of Hercule Poirot. I do not like being handed a solution on a silver tray. The pistol rose. Poirot did not flinch. From the darkness above came the sharp metallic cocking of a rifle bolt. Drop it, Fritz. Helena von Klaus stood on the terrace balcony, a Mauser carbine steady at her shoulder. She was still in her black dress, but the black silk stark against the snow on the railing. Her face was marble. Brandt hesitated, calculating distances. Helena's voice was ice. I watched you climb out of the study window the night Eric died. I thought at first you had come to help him. Then I found the second confession, the real one, in the humidor this morning, the one that names you as the true traitor. Eric was going to expose you both tomorrow. You couldn't risk it. Brandt's laugh was ugly. And you think anyone will believe the word of a hysterical widow over a colonel of the Reich? I don't need them to, Helena said. I only need you dead. For a heartbeat, the alley held its breath. Then Brandt spun, firing twice toward the balcony. Plaster exploded from the wall beside Helena's head. She did not flinch. The carbine cracked once. Brandt staggered, the pistol falling from his fingers as blood bloomed dark across his greatcoat. He went to his knees, surprise on his face, then toppled sideways into the snow. Helena lowered the rifle. Her hands did not shake. Poirot walked forward and looked down at the dying man. Muller was the hand, he said quietly. You, Colonel, were the brain, a conspiracy within a conspiracy, very Prussian. Brandt tried to speak, only blood came. Helena descended the iron stairs slowly, the rifle still in her hands. Snowflakes settled on her golden hair like stars. I should have shot him that night, she said. But I was afraid. Eric begged me not to make a scandal. He thought he could still save the boy, Muller. He always believed in redemption. Her voice broke, the first crack in the marble. I let him die alone. Poirot took the rifle gently from her unresisting hands. You have avenged him, madame. That is not the same as saving him, but it is something. From the mouth of the alley came the sound of running boots. 2 uniformed policemen appeared, lanterns swinging, followed by a grim-faced Becker. Helena straightened. I will make a full statement, Commissar. Becker looked from the body to the rifle to Poirot and shook his head in wonder. Poirot touched his hat brim. You will find the remaining documents in Colonel Brandt's briefcase inside the study. They are addressed to a certain Major Langley at the British Embassy. I took the liberty of leaving them where the Colonel expected to collect them. Becker almost smiled. You planned this? I arranged the stage, Poirot corrected. Madame provided the final act. Helena looked once more at Brandt's body, then turned away. Take me to my husband's study, Monsieur Poirot. I wish to sit where he sat one last time. Poirot offered his arm. Together they walked back through the courtyard, past the footprints already filling with new snow, past the dark windows where the house watched in silence. Behind them, the policeman covered Brant's face with his own greatcoat. The scar was hidden at last. As they reached the French windows, Helena paused. "Was there ever really prussic acid in the brandy?" she asked suddenly. Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A pinch only. Enough for the odor, not enough to kill. The general died of the bullet, as the good Meller believed. But the scent of bitter almonds, that was my little addition to keep the actors on their marks." Helena gave a soft, wondering laugh that was almost a sob. "You are a devil, Monsieur Poirot." "Non, madame. Merely a Belgian who dislikes loose ends." Inside, the study lamp still burned on the desk, throwing its green circle of light over the place where a proud man had died, betrayed by those he trusted most. Helena sat in the general's chair, laid the rifle across the blotter, and closed her eyes. Poirot stood at the window and watched the snow cover the last traces of blood in the courtyard below. "Order and method," he murmured to the night. "In the end, they always prevail." Somewhere in the house, a clock began to strike 3. The sound rolled through the empty corridors like a funeral bell. And for the first time since the shot that started it all, the von Klaus mansion was truly silent. Chapter 7. The Hidden Alliance dawn came late and reluctant, a thin gray wash over the snow-covered roofs of Rauchstrasse. The house was quiet now, almost unnaturally so. 2 bodies had been removed in the night. Brant wrapped in a blood-stained blanket, Muller still alive but raving in a straitjacket. The servants had been sent to their quarters with orders not to leave. Only the immediate family and Poirot remained, moving through the corridors like ghosts who had forgotten how to leave. Poirot studied them for a long time, then slipped the photograph into his pocket and folded the confession into his breast wallet. The list he left where it was. The door opened softly. Helena entered, no longer in black, but in a severe charcoal dress. Hair drawn back, face composed. She carried a small silver tray with coffee for 2. "I thought you would still be here," she said. Poirot accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "Madam, you should rest." "I rested enough while my husband was being murdered under my roof." She set the tray down and looked at the desk. "Is that the letter Eric meant to give the minister?" "It is. He intended to save Muller, one last act of paternal folly. But he could not save Brant. Brant knew it. That is why he hurried events." Helena touched the confession lightly as though it might burn her. "He wrote it the day he altered his will. He told me he had to clean the stables before he died. I thought he meant Heinrich's gambling debts." Poirot sipped the coffee, perfect as always. He watched her over the rim. "Madame, there is one matter that still puzzles Poirot. The pearl earring found on the study carpet the night of the murder. It is from a pair you wore to the opera on the 10th. Yet you insist you never entered the study after dinner." Helena's fingers rose instinctively to her left ear, where a single pearl now hung alone. "I lied," she said simply. "I went up at 10 minutes to 9 to beg Eric once more to spare Karl. The door was ajar. I saw Brant leaving by the French windows, coat collar turned up. Eric was slumped in his chair, still breathing. I thought he had suffered a stroke. I knelt beside him. The earring must have come loose then. When I realized he had been shot, I panicked. I fled back downstairs before the others came." She looked at Poirot steadily. "I protected a murderer because I was afraid the scandal would kill Eric's reputation. I was wrong." Poirot inclined his head. "Fear makes cowards of us all, madam. But courage brought you to the balcony last night." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. Courage, or simple hatred. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Heinrich appeared, pale and unshaven but sober, dressed in a dark suit that no longer looked borrowed from a dissipated prince. I heard everything, he said. I was listening outside. He looked at his stepmother with something close to respect. You should have let me shoot the bastard. Helena's smile vanished. Violence is what killed your father, Heinrich. I will not have it kill you too. Heinrich's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Instead, he crossed to the desk, picked up the British list and read it in silence. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He was going to sacrifice himself to save that snake Muller, my father. The old fool. His voice cracked. He never said a kind word to me in 28 years. But he was ready to die for a traitor. Poirot spoke gently. He believed in redemption, monsieur. It is not such a foolish belief. Heinrich crushed the paper in his fist. Redemption didn't put a bullet in his head. No, Poirot agreed. Ambition did. And fear. And greed. The oldest motives in the world. The door opened again. Anna Schmidt entered, eyes red from crying, carrying a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. Forgive me, gnädige Frau, she said, curtsying. The postman brought this. It is addressed to Monsieur Poirot, care of the house. Poirot took the parcel, weighed it, sniffed it, habit, then slit the string with his pocket knife. Inside was a leather-bound ledger and a note in a woman's hurried hand. Herr Poirot, if you are reading this, I am already dead or fled. These are the accounts Karl kept for Colonel Brandt. The money came from London. I took them from Brandt's safe yesterday. Tell the general's son I am sorry I could not save his father. Ilse von Hagen. Poirot opened the ledger. Columns of figures, dates, initials, enough to hang a dozen men. He closed it thoughtfully. So, the circle closes. Helena looked suddenly weary beyond bearing. Is it truly finished? Poirot considered. Almost. There is still the matter of the second shot. They stared at him. Last night, he explained, when Colonel Brandt fired at you on the balcony, madam, only 2 shots were heard. Yet the police found 3 spent cartridges in his pistol. One was fired earlier, into the ceiling of this very room at 20 minutes past midnight while the house slept. A signal, perhaps, or a warning. He moved to the French windows and pointed to a small, almost invisible hole in the plaster above the curtain rail. A bullet was embedded there, fired upward. Someone was in this room with Brandt after Muller's arrest, Poirot continued. Someone who knew the game was lost and wished to silence the last witness. All color left Helena's face. Heinrich swore softly. Anna gave a small, terrified cry and pressed her hand to her mouth. Poirot turned to her, voice gentle but implacable. Mademoiselle, you were seen leaving the servants' stair at 12:30. You came here. Why? Anna's knees buckled. She would have fallen had Heinrich not caught her. I wanted to find the letter the master wrote about me, she whispered. The words tumbled out. He promised to acknowledge me after his death, a dowry, a name. Colonel Brandt found out. He threatened to expose me as illegitimate if I did not help him. He made me bring him brandy, distract the footman. I didn't know he meant to kill. Tears streamed down her face. When the captain was arrested, I thought it was over, but the colonel telephoned, ordered me to meet him here. He said if I brought the ledger, he would burn the letter about me. When I came, he tried to... She touched her throat where faint bruises still showed. He had the pistol. I struggled. It went off into the ceiling. Then I ran. Poirot sighed. And you left the ledger with Fräulein von Hagen's note? Anna nodded miserably. Helena stepped forward and took the girl's trembling hands. You poor child. You are safe now. Heinrich looked at his stepmother in astonishment, then at Anna. Something changed in his face, shame, perhaps, or the beginnings of responsibility. Poirot gathered the documents. The police will need these, but they will also need compassion. Mademoiselle Schmidt was a pawn, nothing more. He turned to the door, then paused. One last thing. Madame the will. Your husband added a codicil the same day he wrote the confession. It is in the safe. You will find it. Generous to all his children. Helena's eyes widened. Heinrich made a strangled sound. Poirot bowed slightly. I believe the general found his redemption after all. He left them there, stepmother, son, and secret daughter, standing together in the cold morning light that now poured across the desk where a good man had died trying to do right in an evil time. Outside, the snow had melted into sleet. Poirot turned up his collar and walked toward the waiting taxi. In his pocket, the photograph of Ilse von Hagen seemed suddenly heavy. He would post the ledger anonymously to Major Langley with a note. The account is closed. Some debts are paid in blood, others in silence. As the taxi pulled away, he glanced back once. 3 figures stood at the study window, silhouetted against the light, arms almost but not quite touching. The von Klaus mansion looked for the first time in many years like a house where healing might begin. Poirot allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Order, he murmured, and method, and occasionally, mercy. The taxi turned the corner and the house disappeared behind a curtain of sleet, taking its ghosts with it. Chapter 8. Threads. Unraveling the threads. The storm arrived at dusk. A hard, wet wind drove sleet against the windows of the von Klaus mansion, like thrown gravel. Inside, the great chandelier in the entrance hall swayed and tinkled, throwing fractured light across the marble floor. The house felt smaller now, almost cozy in its grief, as though the walls themselves had drawn a breath after the horrors of the past 48 hours. Poirot regarded them the way a chess master regards the final position after the opponent's fatal blunder, with satisfaction, but also with sorrow for the waste. The door opened. Helena entered first, followed by Heinrich and Anna. They had dressed with care, Helena in dove gray, Heinrich in sober black, Anna in a simple wool dress that made her look suddenly older. They moved as though pulled by the same invisible string, stopping in a half-circle before the table. Helena spoke first. You sent for us, Monsieur Poirot? I did, madame. One last time to tie the final knots. He gestured to the chairs. Please. They sat. The wind moaned in the chimney. Poirot picked up the forged confession. This document, so perfect in its imitation, was never intended to fool me. It was meant to fool history. Colonel Brandt wished the world to remember General von Klaus as a traitor who took his own life in shame. A neat, permanent disgrace. Muller was the brush. Brandt held the paint. He laid it down and lifted the real confession. This one the general wrote for his children, for all 3 of you. He discovered the treason in September. Instead of immediate arrest, he tried to save Muller, the young man he had practically adopted. He gave him until the 13th of November to confess voluntarily. Brandt could not risk it. He accelerated the calendar. Heinrich's voice was hoarse. So my father died because he was too decent. Precisely. Poirot said softly. A rare cause of death in our century. He turned to Anna. Mademoiselle, the bruises on your throat, Brandt's work? She nodded, touching the marks unconsciously. He said if I did not help, he would have me sent to a camp as a degenerate half-Jew. My mother was Jewish. The general protected us both. When Brandt found out, her voice failed. Helena reached across and took the girl's hand. Heinrich watched, something unreadable in his eyes. Poirot lifted the cufflink. This belonged to Muller, yes, but the blood is Brandt's. Type AB, quite rare. A drop fell when Muller struggled with the dying general and scratched Brandt's wrist as he handed over the forged confession. Brandt kept the cufflink to use later as a false clue against Muller. He did not expect the blood to betray him. He set it down and took up the vial. The famous bitter almond scent, a harmless solution of nitrobenzene, added by me to the brandy decanter after the police left. A theatrical touch, but useful. It kept everyone thinking in terms of poison first, bullet second, and prevented premature arrest. Helena gave a small, incredulous laugh. You staged half the evidence. Only the harmless half, madame. The lethal half was all too real. He lifted the pearl earring last. And this, the tiny witness. It fell when you knelt beside your dying husband, madame. You thought no one noticed. But pearls remember. Helena closed her eyes briefly. Poirot placed his hands flat on the table. Now the codicil. The General von Klaus revoked the disinheritance of Heinrich. He acknowledged Anna as his natural daughter and left her 50,000 marks and the small estate in Bavaria. The bulk of the fortune remains yours, madam, but with a trust for both children. He signed it the morning of the day he died. Heinrich made a choked sound. Anna began to cry silently. Helena's voice was steady. He never told me. He wished it to be a surprise after his death, proof that he had not lost faith in any of you. Brandt discovered the codicil yesterday and planned to destroy it tonight. That is why he returned. Silence fell, broken only by the storm. Poirot gathered the documents into a neat pile. The British will receive Brandt's ledger anonymously. The Reich will be told the general died rooting out treason, a hero after all. Müller will be tried quietly and shot. Brandt's name will be erased from the army lists. The family honor is safe. He looked at each of them in turn. You have a choice now. You may remain three strangers bound by shame, or you may become a family bound by something stronger. The general's last gift is that choice. Heinrich stood abruptly. For a moment Poirot thought he would speak, then crossed to Anna and awkwardly, gently put his arms around her. She stiffened, then sagged against him, weeping into his shoulder. Helena watched them, tears bright in her own eyes, but not falling. Poirot picked up his hat and coat. My work here is finished. Helena rose. You will stay for dinner at least? He smiled, the famous smile that was half kindly, half mischievous. Alas, madam, the Orient Express leaves at 9. But I will carry with me the memory of a house where decency triumphed, however late. At the door he paused. One final thing, the second shot into the ceiling. Anna did not fire it in panic. She fired it deliberately to summon help. She is braver than any of us knew. Anna lifted her head, astonished. Poirot bowed to her. You saved yourself, mademoiselle, and perhaps all of us. He left them then. In the hall, Richter waited with Poirot's galoshes already warmed by the fire. Will there be anything else, sir? Only this, mon vieux. Poirot pressed a small envelope into the butler's hand. Enough money to retire comfortably to the Bodensee. For 33 years of loyal service to a difficult man. He knew, you know. He was proud of you. Richter's old eyes filled. He could only nod. Outside, the sleet had turned back to snow, fat, silent flakes drifting through the cones of the street lamps. Poirot's taxi drew up exactly on time. As he climbed in, he glanced back once more. 3 silhouettes stood at the lighted doorway. Helena in the center, a hand on each young shoulder. They did not wave, but they watched until the taxi turned the corner and disappeared. Poirot settled against the leather seat, closed his eyes, and allowed himself a small sigh. Another human tragedy, he murmured. Resolved, one hopes, into something resembling justice. The driver glanced in the mirror. Where to, Herr Poirot? Bahnhof Friedrichstrasse, if you please, and drive slowly. Tonight Berlin is beautiful. Snow blurred the windows, softening the hard lines of the city, covering the blood and the footprints and the scars. By morning the streets would be clean again, ready for new stories. Poirot twirled the ends of his mustache, satisfied. In his breast pocket, the photograph of Ilse von Hagen lay beside the General von Klaus's real confession. He would post them both tomorrow from Vienna, perhaps, or Budapest. Some truths were better sent anonymously. The taxi slid forward into the white night, carrying the little Belgian detective away from a house where, against all probability, love had survived betrayal, and a family had been born in the very room where a good man died. Somewhere behind him a clock struck 7. The sound was clear and unafraid, the first honest chime the mansion had given in years. Poirot smiled in the darkness. "Order," he whispered to the falling snow, "and method, and tonight a little mercy or two." The storm closed over his tracks, and Berlin kept its newest secret. Chapter 9. The Last Train from Friedrichstrasse. The platform at Friedrichstrasse smelled of coal smoke, wet wool, and the metallic promise of departure. It was 20:37 on the evening of 14th of November 1935, and the Orient Express to Vienna, Budapest, Constantinople stood hissing beside the shed like an impatient dragon. Porters in blue smocks shouted in 3 languages. A brass band somewhere played Badenweiler Marsch with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Travelers clutched fur coats and secrets in equal measure. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in Chesterfield coat and Homburg, stood beside Wagenlitz's carriage number 3309, allowing the conductor Pierre Michel to check his ticket with the reverence usually reserved for royalty. "Compartment 7, Monsieur Poirot. Your usual. Champagne is already cooling." "Merci, Pierre. One trusts the kitchen has not succumbed to sauerkraut since last month." Pierre grinned and moved on. Poirot was about to mount the steps when a voice behind him, low and urgent, cut through the platform din. "Monsieur Poirot, please, 1 minute." He turned. Helena von Klaus stood there alone, bareheaded in the cold, a dark green cloak over her gray dress. Snowflakes melted in her pale hair like fleeting diamonds. In her gloved hand she held a small flat package wrapped in brown paper. "Madame," Poirot said, surprised, "you should not be here. The hour, the weather, I had to come." She glanced over her shoulder as though expecting shadows to follow. "Heinrich drove me. He and Anna are waiting in the car." She pressed the package into his hands. "From all 3 of us. Open it later, when you are on the train." Poirot inclined his head. "You honor me." "No," she said quietly. "You gave us back our future. We owe you more than any of us can repay." A whistle shrilled. Porters began slamming doors. Helena took a breath. "There is something else. This morning the ministry telephoned. They are restoring Eric's full honors. There will be a state funeral next week. They wish me to accept the pour le mérite on his behalf. Because of you, he will be buried as a hero." Poirot's eyes softened. "He was always a hero, madame. Merely misunderstood by his century." She gave a small, tremulous smile. "Heinrich has enrolled at the university, law of all things. He says he wants to understand justice before he spends another mark. And Anna," her voice caught, "Anna has agreed to take the von Klaus name. Legally, she will live with us." Poirot bowed over her hand. "Then the general's last battle is won." The conductor appeared. "Monsieur, s'il vous plaît, we depart." Helena stepped back. For a moment the noise of the station fell away and there was only the snow and the 2 of them. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Poirot raised her hand briefly to his lips. "Adieu, madame. Live long and kindly." He mounted the steps. The door closed. With a sigh of steam and a shudder, the long blue train began to move. Poirot walked through the swaying corridors to his compartment. The champagne stood in its bucket. Beside it, surprisingly, a small silver vase held 3 white roses. He smiled. Helena's touch. Only when the lights of Berlin were sliding past the window did he unwrap the brown paper package. Inside lay a slim Morocco leather case. He opened it. On black velvet rested the General's Pour le Mérite, the famous blue max, its enameled cross gleaming softly, catching the lamplight. Pinned to the ribbon was a folded note in Helena's handwriting. Eric wanted you to have this. He once told me that if ever a man deserved it who was not born German, it was the little Belgian who saw truth when everyone else saw only shadows. Wear it in health, monsieur, or keep it in memory of a soldier who died believing honor was still possible. Hercule Poirot sat very still for a long time, the medal in his palm. Outside, the city lights dwindled to sparks, then to nothing. The train gathered speed, rushing south through the dark heart of Europe. At length he opened his dispatch case and took out the photograph of Ilse von Hagen. On the back, in pencil, someone, Heinrich, he thought, had written, "She was found this morning in the Landwehr Canal. They say suicide. We will take care of her mother. Some debts only the living can pay." Poirot slipped the photograph inside the metal case and closed it gently. He rang for the steward, ordered dinner sent to his compartment, then sat back as the train rocked through the night and snow. In the corridor outside, passengers laughed and clinked glasses. Somewhere a woman sang softly in Greek. The ordinary world, indifferent and alive, hurried on. Poirot lifted his champagne flute to the empty air. "To absent friends," he said quietly. "To General Erich von Klaus, who tried to save a traitor and paid with his life. To Captain Karl Müller, who could not be saved. To Colonel Fritz Brandt, who mistook power for honor. And to 3 children who learned, almost too late, what family means." He drank. The train thundered across a bridge. For an instant the compartment was filled with the reflected lights of a town far below. Red, white, gold, like a fallen constellation. Then darkness again. Poirot placed the blue max carefully in his breast pocket over his heart and turned off the lamp. In the corridor the blue nightlight glowed. The wheels sang their steady, hypnotic song. Justice, justice, justice. Somewhere between Berlin and Dresden, Hercule Poirot slept, the faintest of smiles on his lips, and for once no dreams at all. When he woke at dawn, the train was already climbing into the Austrian Alps. Snowfields blazed pink under the rising sun. In the crisp silence, he opened the metal case once more, pinned the blue max beneath his lapel where only he would know it was there, and went to breakfast. The Orient Express rolled on, carrying its small, immaculate passenger southward, away from treason and winter, and a house that had finally begun to heal. Behind him in Berlin, 3 white roses stood in a vase on General von Klaus's empty desk, and the snow kept falling, soft and absolving, over every footprint the night had tried to hide. Chapter 10. The General's Confession. The cemetery at Invalidenfriedhof lay under a light November frost. Bare lime trees rattled like sabers overhead. The only color came from the crimson and black of the Reichskriegsflag draped over the newest memorial stone. A small honor guard in steel helmets stood at ease, breath pluming white in the cold. Beyond the railings, a thin crowd of officers, diplomats, and silent Berliners watched the ceremony no one had quite believed would happen. General der Infanterie Erich Ludwig Adolf von Klaus had been reburied with full military honors exactly 1 year after his death. At the graveside stood the 3 people who had once been strangers to one another. Helena von Klaus, in sober charcoal with a single white rose at her throat, looked 10 years younger than the widow who had knelt beside a year ago beside a dying man. Heinrich, tall now in the uniform of a reserve lieutenant, the shoulder tabs still stiff with newness, held his peaked cap against his chest. His face had lost its petulance. Hardship and responsibility had carved something harder and cleaner. Anna von Klaus, She had taken the name legally in the spring, wore the dark blue of a deaconess trainee, the silver cross at her collar catching the pale sun. She no longer flinched when cameras turned toward her. A bugler sounded the Zapfenstreich. The notes hung in the frost like glass. When silence returned, Helena stepped forward and laid a wreath of laurel and white roses on the grave. The ribbon bore a simple inscription in her own hand. To my husband, who taught us in the end that honor is not inherited, it is chosen every day. H. She did not cry. None of them did. After the salute, the rifles cracked once sharp and clean, and the small crowd began to disperse. The three lingered. Heinrich spoke first, voice low. He would have hated the fuss. Helena smiled faintly. He would have pretended to hate it. Secretly, he would have loved every trumpet. Anna touched the cold stone. I still expect him to step out from behind a tree and bark at us for being late to dinner. They stood a moment longer, breathing together in the cold, a family forged in gunfire and snow. A discreet cough sounded behind them. Hercule Poirot, wrapped in the same fur-collared coat he had worn that first night, stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand. The year had added no gray to his mustache. If anything, it curled more triumphantly than ever. Helena's face lit. Monsieur Poirot, you came all this way? I was in Vienna, he said, and the train, it stops in Berlin. One does not refuse an invitation from old friends. He bowed over her hand, then Heinrich's, then Anna's. You have done well, all of you. Heinrich flushed. I'm studying law, as you know, and I have paid every gambling debt. It took most of the allowance, but it is paid. Anna added softly. I finish my nursing exams next month. The hospital in Charlottenburg has accepted me. Helena looked at them both with quiet pride. The house on Rauchstrasse is no longer a mausoleum. We have opened the shutters. There is even music again. Poirot's eyes twinkled. And the blue max? Helena touched her throat where the cross now hung on a thin gold chain. I wear it always, hidden. Eric would approve. They walked slowly together toward the gates. A black Mercedes waited, the von Klaus crest discreetly restored on the door. Heinrich opened it for the women, then paused. Monsieur, may I ask one thing? That night on the train, when you left, did you ever doubt the ending you gave us? Poirot considered. I doubted everything, mon jeune ami. That is my profession. But I believed in the possibility of redemption, and today I see I was right. At the car, Helena turned. Will you come back to the house? Richter has kept your room exactly as you left it. There is goose and glühwein, and Anna plays the piano now. Poirot hesitated, glanced at his watch, then smiled, the smile that had closed 100 cases. The Orient Express can wait one more night. They drove through streets already twinkling with early Christmas lights. Berlin, scarred and noisy and alive, had moved on as cities always do. But in the back of the Mercedes, the four of them spoke quietly of small, ordinary things. Anna's exams. Heinrich's first courtroom victory defending a Jewish shopkeeper against false charges. Helena's plan to turn part of the estate into a home for war orphans. No one mentioned treason or poison or gunshots in the snow. At the mansion, the great doors stood open. Richter, older but upright, waited on the steps with tears in his eyes he refused to shed. Inside, the fire roared. The chandelier blazed. A gramophone played Mozart softly in the background. They drank glühwein in the drawing room where once a forged confession had been read aloud. Anna played a slow movement of Beethoven with surprising tenderness. Heinrich poured more wine. Helena sat beside Poirot on the sofa, and very quietly, so only he could hear, said, I kept one secret from the others. The codicil had a final line Eric added the night he died. He wrote, If Poirot comes, tell him the little gray cells were the only army that ever defeated me, and I salute them." Poirot's eyes misted for the only time anyone present had ever seen. He raised his glass. "To General Erich von Klaus," he said, voice steady, "who lost a battle but won the war that mattered." 4 glasses touched in the firelight. Outside, the first snow of the new winter began to fall, soft and silent, covering the city as though to say, some wounds heal cleanly if one gives them time and courage and love. Much later, when the house slept, Poirot stood alone in the study. The desk had been moved slightly. A small framed photograph now stood where the confession had once lain. The general in full uniform, arm around a smiling young officer who looked remarkably like a reformed Heinrich. In the corner, almost hidden, was another picture. Poirot himself, taken secretly on the cemetery path that afternoon, standing hat in hand before the grave. On the blotter lay a single white rose and a fresh sheet of the general's heavy cream notepaper. Someone, Helena he suspected, had written upon it in the general's own severe hand, a perfect, affectionate forgery. "Thank you, old friend. The confession is complete." Poirot touched the paper gently, then turned off the green-shaded lamp. He left the room on silent feet, closing the door behind him with the soft finality of a book closing at the last page. In the hall, his coat and hat waited. Richter stood ready with a thermos of coffee for the journey. At the threshold, Poirot paused, looked back once at the warm glow behind the windows, and smiled. "Bon voyage, mes enfants," he whispered to the snow-filled night. "Live long. That is the only order left to give." The Mercedes carried him away through the hushed streets. By the time it reached Friedrichstrasse, the train was already in, steam pluming like a farewell. Poirot boarded without looking back. Somewhere in the darkness between stations, he opened the metal case, kissed the cold enamel of the blue Max once, and returned it to his breast pocket. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the wheels sing him southward.